Hey guys, in this video I would like to talk to you about how you can master ancient Roman history. Alright, so which authors should you read, which historians should you read to master ancient Roman history? Unfortunately, there is no easy easy way to get into this stuff. History is pretty hard, and Roman history, because it took place such a long time ago, is in a lot of ways more difficult than studying modern history. Like for instance, modern England, modern China, modern USA. So that being said, let's proceed. Okay, number one, Livy. Okay, Livy was without a doubt one of the greatest historians ever. He essentially covers the Roman Republican period, so the Roman Republic, which was pretty much from 8th century BC until 1st century AD. Really, really big read, Livy. It's several books he wrote, dealing with different periods, and it's close to, depending on which edition you get, it's at least 1,000 pages, and those are really small print pages. I mean, if it's kind of a larger print, it could be close to 1,700, 2,000 pages. A really humongous read, but very beautiful prose. Terrific historian, and you cannot get away from Livy. Like if you want to master Roman history, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Machiavelli. This great Italian political philosopher who wrote *The Prince*. He also wrote a book on Livy. Okay, so Livy really does matter. Cannot get away from Livy. Author number 2 is Polybius. So Polybius was a Greek, actually, lived, I believe, around 200 BCE, and he came up with this, interesting thesis that the key to Roman greatness was, their balance, essentially. Like the plebeians, the people, the aristocrats, and the monarchical element were well balanced. So he said that when one of these three components gains the upper hand, your state declines. So how in Rome there was the Senate, there were tribunes, it was there were consuls. Like it was a well balanced system. So Polybius gave us this theory about sort of Roman state being well balanced, and he's a terrific historian. So check out his the histories. By the way, he also influenced Machiavelli in a lot of ways. And by the way, as far as this list is concerned, this list of 5 greatest Roman historians, Polybius is probably the least difficult to read. All right. Our next historian is Plutarchos, which is how his name sounds in Greek, and he is more famous, of course, in the Western world as Plutarch and his lives. A pretty huge book, close to 1,300 pages, and he compares, lives of, greatest Greeks and greatest Romans. Kind of, they're kind of like case studies to some extent. So he finds, great, let's say general, and compares, from Greece, and compares him to a similar great German in the Roman civilization. So, for instance, he, compares, Alexander and Caesar. So terrific historian, really deep. As far as comparing him to Livy and Polybius, I think he has the most interesting stuff. like he has those incredible little details which if you really take your time and think about what you read, it's just mind-blowing stuff, like a lot of it. Like for instance, I found in Plutarch that there's this kind of insignificant passage that he's talking about Caucasus and is listing some people and sort of an army unit which was drafted from that region. And he mentions these Albi people from essentially modern day Azerbaijan, and it kind of makes you think, well, are these the Albanians? Because to this day it's a mystery where Albanian people came from, because their language is not related to other languages in that region. So it kind of seems like perhaps they came from there, like Albi people from Azerbaijan, and they moved to the west, perhaps. And there are other incredible details, sort of little facts which are just mind-blowing, you can find in Plutarch. So these are the three greatest ancient sources, okay? And there are other sort of notable mentions which perhaps I should have mentioned, like Tacitus and Suetonius and Dio, and they're terrific, but these three are they're as good as it gets, essentially, right? So if you read these three, and I'd like to kind of tell you honestly, it's not always easy, it's not always fun, you got to be really disciplined, but if you stick with it, it really will be worth your while. So these are the primary sources for studying Roman history. So now let me tell you about the two greatest modern Roman historians. And by modern, I don't mean like 21st century, but essentially in the past couple hundred years. Okay. So the first one is Edward Gibbon, without a doubt, one of the greatest, most insightful historians ever. Wrote a big fat book, which is usually published in several volumes, called The Decline of the Roman Empire. That's the title. Sounds pretty boring, but he's a great writer. So his theory is that the Roman Empire declined primarily because of Christianity. Okay, so kind of Christian dogmas, Christian religious doctrines really contradicted sort of Roman Republican pagan virtues, and that's why like slowly the whole thing kind of collapsed. I mean, it has been challenged since this work was written. It has been challenged more than once, and I think successfully, but still one of the greatest sources for studying Roman Empire. And he's also a terrific source on the later Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire. So that's Edward Gibbon, and our last historian is Theodor Mommsen, a German historian, one of those few people to get the Nobel Prize for Literature, even though he was not a poet or a novelist. Okay, so he got the Nobel Prize for a work of non-fiction. That's pretty rare. I mean, a couple other people have received it, such as Bertrand Russell, Jean-Paul Sartre, Henri Bergson, French philosopher, and Theodor Mommsen was perhaps the only historian. I don't know, like I do not know all the people who got the Nobel Prize in Literature, but he was one of those very few historians to get the Nobel Prize. So he wrote a huge work called The History of Rome, usually published in 4 or 5 volumes. Really fundamental, really deep. Terrific source. Also very much worth your while. So, just to recap, if you guys really are serious about Roman history, and by the way, I mean serious, like not just to, kind of check it out, see if you like it, but if you really want to Perhaps get a master's, get a PhD, or do some research, that type of thing. These are the sources you gotta study. Livy, Plutarch, Polybius, Edward Gibbon, and Mommsen.